HJ Res 69. I showed the gentleman, the chairman from Alaska. The gentleman, Don Young, is here. Mr. Young, I don't know if there's anybody else that would seek to give testimony, but we're going to go ahead and have you on this panel. Mr. Chairman, we're delighted that you're here. You've heard the statement that I made, that I very much believe that states should have rights and should stand up for those, and evidently that's what the gentleman intends to tell us today. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My resolution is very simple. It's against the power grab of Washington, D.C. The rule issued by the previous administration is a violation of existing federal law. It seizes authority away from the state of Alaska to manage fish and wildlife for non-subsistence and federal wildlife refuges in Alaska. The federal law, with limited exception, affirms and protects the state of Alaska's authority, passed by this Congress. The Alaska Statehood Act clearly grants Alaska the full authority to manage fish and wildlife in Alaska, including all federal lands. Further, the Alaska Statehood Compact requires the management of wildlife resources through the Department of Fish and Game of the state for sustainable yield and maximum benefit for its people. The Alaska National Interest Lands Act by Mr. Udall, I worked closely on that bill, carefully drafted a compromise I worked on in 1980, protected Alaska's authority to manage wildlife across the state on state, private, and federal lands. Now, the scope of the original proposal of regulations by the Fish and Wildlife is enormous. The rule applies broadly to 16 federal wildlife refuges in Alaska, amounting to 76.8 million acres of land, 20% of Alaska. That's the size of New Mexico. I believe it's the size of Massachusetts, and I think it's the size of a third of the size of Florida, and I can go on down the line. This rule fundamentally alters not only how national wildlife refuges of fish and wildlife habitats for them can be managed, but also change the relationship, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, between the Fish and Wildlife and the state of Alaska. They should be jointly working together. This is a classic example, again, of the previous administration of overreaching. Do it our way or get out of the way. We don't care about the Constitution. We don't care about the law. We're going to do it our way. Now, I will say, I did also the National Wildlife Refuge System. I wrote that bill. The Fish and Wildlife says that gives them the authority to take this authority of managing fish and wildlife away. This rule is opposed by the state of Alaska, Alaska delegation. I would say even the native corporations in the state of Alaska, as it takes away their authority too. We have to recognize this is not about the little polar bears and the little grizzly bears and the wolves that you're seeing on television. This is about the state's rights to manage, not allowing the federal government to do it. And I urge you to think about this. I've had a lot of people say, oh, we can't do that. I'm getting a lot of letters and correspondence saying you're going to kill or you're going to bait. We're not doing those things. Yet they say we have the authority to take and stop you from doing something. And I'm saying we're not doing it. We don't need to do it. But we want to be able to take and manage our fishing game so we have the sustainable yield, that our fishing game will be there forever. Not, by the way, Mother Nature is a very cruel taskmaster. What they're proposing with their actions to take away our control would preclude us from maintaining the species that are necessary in the state of Alaska for the state. So I urge you to approve this rule, review this program, bring it to a vote, and get the federal government off states' backs. We just heard some arguments here previously. The states have a right under law, especially the state of Alaska, where we became, to manage, to have an agency come in and say, no, you don't. It's just, to me, dead wrong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I answer any questions.
Chairman, thank you very much. Does any Republican seek time? Does any Democrat seek time? The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, I just say I disagree with you on the substance, but I want to assure you that the fix is in. 9-4, this will come to the floor under a closed rule, and so this will happen. But it's great to see you, but I disagree with you on the substance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis.
Thank you. Maybe it's because I'm a newer member, Mr. Chair, but I have a greater sense of optimism with my colleague from Massachusetts. I hope to sway my 9 Republican colleagues to deny a closed rule and deny moving this bill forward. This bill should really be called the Puppy Killing Act. What it does is it allows inhumane methods and cruel methods like killing wolf pups and their mothers in and near their dens. It allows for killing brown bears over bait and scouting grizzly bears and shooting them and killing them from the air without even landing. None of those are fair chase methods. Ask any hunter. None of those are humane, and none of them are consistent with what we want to accomplish in a wildlife refuge. The definition of refuge is a condition of being safe or sheltered from pursuit or danger. Wildlife refuge. That's completely inconsistent with not even allowing a mom and her pups to be safe in their own den in a so-called federal wildlife refuge. This rule has strong support from the people of Alaska. Majority of the people support it. It was made by professional wildlife managers, is consistent with science-based wildlife management practices. It would maintain the diversity of refuges in Alaska as required by the Alaska National Interest Lands Act and National Wildlife Refuge System. My first question is that since this puppy killing bill would allow for egregious, cruel, and unsporting hunting methods like trapping wolf pups in their mother's den and shooting bears from airplanes, my question is, why is it necessary to use those extreme and inhumane methods on federal land as opposed to much more humane methods for wildlife management?
Well, first, let me answer. That's the most bunch of bull poop I've ever heard.
What part
Bull
are you
poop
referring
about
to?
denning wolves, killing puppies, using emotional statement, which do not happen.
What doesn't happen?
That does not happen.
It's,
It
that,
does
well, thank
not
goodness.
happen.
We're claiming my time. What can't happen
You
with this
asked me
rule
a
in
question,
place.
It's my time.
No, it's my time,
Okay.
and I will yield to you in a moment. To be clear, if this rule is repealed, wouldn't killing wolves and pups in their den be allowed to occur?
If it was to occur, it would probably not happen because the state has not done that. And what it takes away just not only wolf pups that you're so interested, you're for abortions, but you're for not killing wolf pups. I've never understood that analogy. That always bothers me. You'll kill a baby, but you worry about a wolf pup.
Look, reclaiming my time, that was a different rule.
Oh,
We all expressed our opinions on that. I know we have our opinions on that, and we've expressed those. What we're talking about here is a method that you ask any hunter, it would not constitute fair chase to shoot a grizzly bear from an airplane. I mean, you're a hunter, I think yourself, and many of my friends are. Do you think it's fair chase to shoot a grizzly bear from an airplane?
That is against the law.
It's currently against this rule.
Against the state law.
Right.
And what has happened is they've come in and decided how they're going to manage it on federal lands. That is the law that the state has that authority. They have not done it. With the propaganda that you're rehearsing there, putting forth to this committee, is full bull poop.
Let me be clear. If this rule is repealed, would it not be consistent with rules to be able to shoot mothers and pups in their den and shoot grizzly bears from airplanes? Would that be allowed if this rule is repealed?
Not as long as it's against the state law.
And it would be entirely the prerogative of Alaskans, in this case, despite it being a federal wildlife refuge, to change that law. Is that correct?
That is the law today. We manage the fish and wildlife. This has been a overreach, and it's the beginning of overreach in all federal lands of the Refuge Act.
Is this a federal wildlife refuge or a state wildlife
This is
refuge?
a federal, but under the Statehood Act, we had the authority by law. Under the Alaska National Lands Act, we have the authority by law that the state is to manage. And what this administration did, the last administration did, they broke the law. We will win this in court if we have to go to court.
Well, let me go back.
We're sure of that, but I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that Congress overturns a illegal act by an administration, and that's what they did. If you believe in the law, If you believe in the law, you would support me.
We're-
If you don't believe in the law, you won't support me.
Reclaiming my time. You're being presumptuous of what the courts might or might not decide. If it wants to be challenged in the courts, that's part of the process. This bill would preempt that process. But getting back to the science of the matter, I want to reference a study I'm sure you're familiar with, the 1997 National Academy of Sciences study that found that Alaska's predator control program, including the assertion that killing wolves and bears somehow makes other wildlife populations healthier, is not supported by science. Alaska has continued to ignore that report. Why should Alaska be able to kill wildlife on a federal wildlife refuge that all American taxpayers help operate and maintain without at least proving a scientific basis that this kind of slaughter, an inhumane slaughter, is actually productive in managing wildlife?
All due respects, that science report that you're referring to was made by those that do not like any taking of any game at any how. That's what it was made for. But it is the law. You apparently don't agree with the law. If you want to change it, change the statehood law. If you want to change it, change the Anelka law. If you want to change it, change the refuge law. But they broke the law. Very simple.
Oh, well, again,
Apparently you believe in breaking the law.
No.
And I'm very hurt about that.
Gentlemen,
because
look,
You
the-
believe in breaking the law because this is the law on the books today.
I move to strike the words that I believe in breaking the law, Mr. Chairman.
You know, if I might,
Oh, poor me.
if the gentleman would wish to take the gentleman's words down, is that what you're asking
Yes.
for?
Just that he said that I support breaking the law, Mr. Chairman, so I feel.
Apparently you do because you support taking
Well-
away the right of the state that's under the law.
This is an unresolved matter of law. So, again, I think there's a strong argument here that the word should be taken down. I'm referencing the bill. I certainly haven't attacked the motivations or accused the gentleman of violating the law in any way. But the gentleman has said that I'm advocating personally for violating the law, and I move to take the words down.
All right, is the gentleman asking me to?
To rule.
Okay, the gentleman is asking that we do that. If the gentleman will please, I will go back and review those words, and we will come back and make that assertion. Committee will now.
Mr. Chair, I can ask that be deferred if the chair
If you
prefers.
would like to defer that, I would tell you that I do believe that the gentleman did make a reference that was in reference to something that he believes is not the law, that you were saying would happen under the law, and he drew a conclusion that if you were for something that's not against the law, you'd be for breaking the law. And that's what I heard the gentleman say. I don't know that the gentleman will be glad to do this, but I'm going to let the gentleman hold his prerogative.
Thank
We will move forward. I will be very pleased to review this with you and with Mrs. Slaughter and with anyone from the committee to make sure that the fine lines were carefully developed here. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I thank the chairman, and in the interest of the committee conducting its business, I'm happy to defer to the chair's consultation with the ranking member with regard to ruling.
Yes, sir.
And I am finishing up here. I just have a couple more questions. So the Alaska National Interest Land Conservation Act, which we've been discussing, which overwhelmingly passed in the House, as you know, requires Fish and Wildlife Service to, as a quote, conserve fish and wildlife populations and their habitats in their natural diversity, end quote, on refugees in Alaska. Alaska's predator killing campaign was actually found by science to be hurting rather than helping natural diversity. Therefore, FWS created a rule to stop that from happening. And how can, you know, I feel I'm having a tough time understanding the argument that somehow that's at odds with the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act when it was actually very clearly designed based on science to fulfill the stated goal of that act, if you want to address that.
Well, first, I don't know what science group you're referring to. I'd had to be clarified the issue. Secondly, may I say, again, we've made it perfectly clear under the Act, the state has the right to manage fish and wildlife on federal lands. Under our Statehood Act also. I want to keep stressing that. And I'm a little bit concerned, you know, again, I know what kind of TV has come out. I know what's been said. It's really a flat falsehood. And to have people attack the state of Alaska after the Congress passed the Statehood Act, we agreed to it. That's what people don't understand. to have an administration go beyond that and, in fact, impugn the law written by Congress. That's wrong. Whether you agree with the animal part of it or not, that doesn't really concern me. It is the breaking of the rules set by Congress by an administration. I'd be saying the same thing. I don't care who it was.
So,
It's wrong.
And, you know, reclaiming my time, when there's a process through the courts, some of President Obama's executive actions have been taken to court. And by the way, some of President Trump's executive actions have already been taken to court. That's a legal process for determining whether something is defensible or not. Certainly, wildlife managers in many of the field believe that not only is this rule consistent with the law, it's actually required by the law as a best practice for wildlife management that's required in the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act. I just want to end by saying that while my district is in Alaska, we're no stranger to wildlife. A bear broke into my cousin's garage just a couple weeks ago. We have mountain lions. And we hope that the successful reintroduction of the wolf into Colorado will soon take hold, because we know the importance of apex predators in healthy ecosystems. The successful reintroduction of the wolf across many of our neighboring states, as soon as they successfully reproduce in Colorado, will help balance our ecosystem. And that's what many studies have found, is that rather than culling apex predators, they should be allowed to keep the population of other animals under control. It's sound wildlife practices. It's consistent with the goals that not only, frankly, many hunters have, but also many who visit my state and visit Mr. Young's state for wildlife viewing and photographing, another important industry. And I would point out that wildlife watching provides roughly 5 times more revenue to the Alaskan economy every year than hunting or trapping. And I think the statistics would be similar for my state. That's from a scientist at Colorado State University, John Loomis, is the source of that information. So again, unlike Mr. McGovern, I'm more optimistic. I would urge my colleagues to vote no on this rule, to not advance this bill to the floor. If there's recourse to the courts, I would encourage the gentleman from Alaska to continue to pursue that, but it's premature at this time for the House to be considering repealing this rule. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Would the gentleman yield for just a moment? Gentleman from Colorado?
Excuse me, just a moment, please. I thank the gentleman for yielding back his time. Thank you very much. Does the gentleman seek time?
Yes.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask the gentleman from Colorado, if this puppy killing was going on, which sounds just horrific, and I trust the witness that it was not going on and did not go on, and especially in the brutal ways that you described, but if it's going on, why didn't the Obama administration deal with it in 2009, 2010, 2011? Why was it in just the midnight before the Obama administration leaves that they feel it's necessary to deal with this?
Will the gentleman yield for a brief answer? The prior administration chose to work in a multi-stakeholder manner, working with hunters, fishermen, local authorities in Alaska to create a consensus rule with broad support, rather than move forward with a rule without that kind of stakeholder input. Happy to yield back.
I reclaim my time, and I just asked the witness, who is from Alaska and who represents the entire state of Alaska, whether he feels that, in fact, the federal government, the bureaucrats sitting in Washington, D.C., who know it all, actually developed some sort of consensus in Alaska.
May I say, there was no consultation at all with the state Fish and Game, with anyone, even the Alaska Natives in the subsistence part of it. They've complained because it does affect their subsistence occupation too. So, you know, I understand with the gentleman from Colorado what he's saying. I said before, and I'll say it again, is bull poop. And I'll keep saying that because this is an issue of the law, not about Fish and Game, it's about the law. And we passed it in Congress 3 times to protect the state of Alaska, the management of. And we agreed to that as a state. And, you know, I've been through this business. I've known him served longer than I have in this Congress, but Mr. Conyers. And I've watched this creep of bureaucratic rulemaking without the vetting process of the Congress. And the Congress acted now, and we're allowing an administration to make overturn a law that we created. That ought to mean something to you. That ought to mean something to you as congressmen. Don't let the bureaucrats run this country. I am a hunter, and I think I'm a good one. I don't kill much, but I hunt, and I appreciate my wildlife. I'm one of the few people probably know more about wolves than anybody in this committee or anybody in the floor of Congress. I have actually harvested wolves because they killed a moose. I happen to be a trapper. 1 year, I want you to think about this. 1 year, on my trap line, the wolves killed 17 moose. Cows with babies ate nothing but the noses and the fetus out of the belly. That's your wolf. The puppies you're trying to protect. We're not killing those wolves. When I was that age, we did. We did. We harvested a lot of wolves. It's about not the animals, it's about the law. And this is why I'm asking you, you will vote against me, I understand. I hope I have enough votes to overturn a bureaucratic overreach of the management of 3 times we passed it in Congress. Mr. Chairman, this is not just this issue, it's what's happened to this nation, where we have parties of people in the political arena will let the president and administration do things when it's our job, and don't let administration break the law. This is what this is all about. And so, Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything to add to this, but I ask you for full support of moving this legislation. I think it's important to the state of Alaska, and I know it's important to the Fish and Game. And I know if we don't do this, we'll probably win it in court about 5 years from now. And that'd be wrong for this body. In my 44 years, the things that disturb me the most, as I've said before, is the constant letting agencies run this country. Let us run it. Let us make the decision. Let us do it right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Does the gentlewoman from Wyoming seek time? Does the gentleman from Washington seek time? The gentleman, Mr. Newhouse, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Just wanted, for one thing, very important to recognize the fact that the young man from Alaska is appearing in front of the Rules Committee. We don't get to see him here that often. And the fact that when you were chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, I think about the time I graduated from college, but I think we can learn a lot from you, so I appreciate your appearance here. But before I ask you a question, I did want to just mention something about the introduction or reintroduction of the apex species. If you look at Jackson, Wyoming, 20 years ago, there were between, I think, 3,000 and 5,000 moose in that area. Today, there's less than 500. Largely because of the very successful reintroduction of the wolf. And so that's what can happen if the situation gets out of hand. And so I just wanted to point that out, that it isn't all peaches and cream like we want people to.
Will the gentleman yield for a brief moment?
Just a brief moment.
Yeah, well, that is in many ways part of the goal. Many areas have overpopulation of deer, venison. I don't know whether there was an overpopulation of moose in that area, but
Certainly not anymore.
well, that's the point. A wolf can help address that overpopulation, which is what they've done in areas.
Well, reclaiming my time, I would just submit that declining population, a tenth of what it was less than 20 years ago, is much more than just managing to a proper number. But I wanted to ask a question of the young chairman from Alaska. When you wrote and helped pass your legislation back, I think, in 1980, was it your intent at all for the U.S. authorities to be regulating wildlife in Alaska?
Absolutely not. And Mo Udall, who was a gentleman, he helped me, although I did oppose the bill, to make sure the state was the manager of fish and game on federal lands. That was his and my bill, really, the Alaska National Lands Act. It was my intent, again, to reinstate why we became a state. We were guaranteed by this Congress certain things. And it was overturned not by the Congress. Now, if you want to try that, have at it. It was overturned by a bureaucrat here in Washington, D.C., and there was no science, no consultation, done in the midnight. It's wrong if you believe in this body. That's what I believe.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that was my point I was hoping to illustrate, that this is federal law that's being ignored by a bureaucracy. And that's what you're trying to point out to us. And I think it would behoove us to listen to the message from the young man from Alaska. With that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back his time. Is there anyone else that would seek time? Well, it sounds like to me, Mr. Chairman, that we have a saying in Texas, 50,000 coyotes aren't wrong, lamb is good. They like lamb also. And this interaction between man and animal is highlighted. I think you see the sensitivities. You came up here with a sensitivity to it. The gentleman from Colorado. We all have these sensitivities. I spend a lot of time in the outdoors as a scouter and really like to see all of these animals. But I do know that there are people who live in and among them, find these interactions between herds and natural animals. So thank you for bringing this up here today. I do want to say this. We do handle sensitive issues up here, some that deal with emotional issues and some deal with issues of the heart. I think we've seen both of those that were present today, and I will go back and review the record, but I do want to compliment both you and the gentleman from Colorado. I will work with him also, but to try and make this at a place where we can continue to have a meeting of the minds and some agreement. I want to thank the gentleman from Colorado and the gentleman from Alaska. Thank you very much. If you'll please, anything you brought in writing, please make sure also the stenographer has that copy before you leave, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you
Thank
very
the
much,
members of the committee. As you know, I'm the only one from Alaska, and I have to carry the ball a lot. And I hope I do the job well, because that's who I represent. If
Yes,
I
sir.
did not represent them, I wouldn't be elected again.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, and I appreciate that. Is there any other member that would seek to give testimony today? H.J. Res. 69. Seeing none, this will now close the hearing portion. H.J. Res. 43, H.J. Res. 69. Chairman will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Georgia.